It happened in the quiet hours of a Roman morning, in a study where the curtains were still drawn. An old man sat alone with a pen. On the desk in front of him lay a document of more than 80 pages, and at the bottom of the last one he wrote a single date, May the 15th. He chose that date on purpose. He could have signed it any day. He waited for this one. And when the ink dried, Pope Leo XIV had done something no pope before him had ever done in quite this way. He had hidden a warning in plain sight inside the most modern document the church had ever produced, and almost no one noticed what it really said. The world saw the headlines first. They called it the artificial intelligence encyclical. The newspapers read the first pages, found the word machine, found the word algorithm, and decided they understood. They wrote that the Pope was worried about computers. They moved on, but the faithful who read it slowly, the ones who pray with documents instead of skimming them, began to feel something move beneath the surface. Because this was never only about machines. It was about the end of something and the beginning of something else. I want to walk through this with you tonight, carefully, the way you would walk through a cathedral in the dark, letting your eyes adjust. And before we go deeper, I'll ask only one thing. If you believe the church still carries truths the world is too distracted to hear, subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Then stay with me, because what comes next is the part they skipped. To understand what Leo XIV wrote, you have to understand why he took the name. Names are not chosen by accident in Rome. When a man becomes pope, the name he selects is a message. It tells the church which inheritance he intends to carry. And when Robert Francis Prevost, an American, stepped onto the balcony and the world learned he would be called Leo, the scholars understood immediately. He was reaching back across more than a century to another Leo, Leo XIII, the Pope of the dying 19th century who watched the old Christian world come apart in his hands. Leo XIII was elected in 1878 into a world that felt to faithful eyes as though it were ending. The papal states were gone, kings were falling. A new philosophy was spreading through the universities that said man no longer needed God. That reason alone would build paradise on earth. And in his very first encyclical, written that same year, on Easter Sunday, Leo XIII did not celebrate the New Age. He named it sickness. The letter was titled by its theme, On the Evils Afflicting Modern Society. He wrote that humanity had turned away from eternal truth and divine law, that it had traded the things of heaven for the things of earth, and that the result would be confusion, disorder, and strife among nations. He wrote that when men reject the authority above them, they soon turn on one another. He warned that the family was being hollowed out, that the sanctity of marriage was being treated as a thing men could rewrite at will, and that when the family falls, civilization falls with it. He saw it coming. The wars of the next century, the ideologies, the machinery of death, he did not live to see them. But he warned, that is the man whose name the new pope took. And once you know that, you cannot read the new encyclical the same way again. Because a pope who chooses to be called Leo is telling you, before he writes a single word, that he too believes he is standing at the edge of an age that is passing away. He is telling you that he sees the same sickness Leo XIII saw wearing new clothes. The document is called Magnifica Humanitas, Magnificent Humanity. And here is the first thing the headlines missed. He did not sign it on an ordinary day. He signed it on May the 15th, 2026, exactly 135 years, to the day after Leo XIII published the most famous encyclical of the modern age, the one on the rights of workers and the dignity of labor, written when the machines of the Industrial Revolution were swallowing human beings whole. Then he chose to release it to the world 10 days later on the 25th. One Leo wrote at the dawn of the machine age about the soul of the worker. The other, Leo signed his own letter on the same calendar day, at the dawn of a new machine age, about the soul of all humanity. This was not coincidence. He wanted you to feel the line connecting them across the century. He wanted you to understand that the same warning was being sounded again, only this time the stakes were higher, because this time the machine does not only move iron and coal, it reaches into the mind. There is something else he did that the cameras caught but few understood. When the moment came to present this letter to the world, he did not do it alone. He stood at the Vatican beside one of the men who helped build the very thing he was writing about, a founder of one of the great companies racing to create artificial intelligence. Picture that for a moment. The successor of Peter, standing shoulder to shoulder with the builder of the new tower, not to bless it, but to look it in the eye and say, "You have a soul to answer for." It was the first time a pope had ever personally handed an encyclical to the world in that way. He was not hiding from the age, he was walking straight into it. Now open the document itself. Do not start in the middle, where the journalist started. Start where he started, the very first words. He writes that humanity, created by God in all its grandeur, is today facing a pivotal choice. And then he gives you two images, two cities. He says, we will either construct a new Tower of Babel, or we will build the city in which God and humanity dwell together. That is the opening of the entire encyclical. Not a sentence about technology, a choice between two destinies. Babel, the tower men built to climb to heaven by their own power, the tower God scattered into confusion. Or the holy city. And if you know your scripture, you know exactly which holy city he means, because at the end of the document he names it, the New Jerusalem, the city John saw in the book of Revelation, coming down out of heaven from God at the end of all things. Stop there for a moment, sit with it. A pope opens his first encyclical with the Tower of Babel and closes it with the final vision of the book of Revelation. He has placed the whole of human history between those two pages, the beginning of human pride and the end of the world. And he is telling the faithful gently in language soft enough that the newspapers would miss it, that we are living somewhere near the end of that story, that the choice in front of us now is not a small one. It is the last kind of choice. Babel or Jerusalem, confusion or the city of God. This is why those who read it carefully began to call it a prophecy and not a policy paper. The letter has 5 parts, and they move like a journey. He begins with those 2 cities. Then he traces the church's voice across the centuries, from Leo XIII through the great letters that followed, the one on the 100th year, the one on caring for our common home, gathering them all up as one long unbroken warning that the modern world has refused to hear. Then he turns to the foundations, human dignity, the common good, the truth that the goods of the earth were given to all and not hoarded by a few. Then he turns to the machine itself, its promises and its dangers. And then, in the final part, he names the true battle of our time, and he gives it a name that should make every believer sit up. The culture of power, he calls it, against the civilization of love. That is the war he says we're in. Not a war of armies, a war for what kind of beings we will choose to remain. Let me show you what he saw in the present age, in his own words, because this is the part the faithful need to hear. He looked at the great new powers rising in the world, the companies that now command more wealth and more reach than most governments on earth. And he wrote that the main drivers of our development are private parties, often crossing all borders, with resources and the power to act that surpass those of many governments. Read that slowly. A pope is telling you that power has slipped out of the hands of kings and parliaments and into the hands of a few who answer to no one. That is the shape of Babel, a tower built by men who believe they no longer need God or each other or any law above their own. And he gave a warning about the nature of these tools that the engineers themselves do not like to hear. He wrote that technology is never neutral because it takes on the characteristics of those who devise it, who finance it, who regulate it, and who use it. Think about what that means. The machine is not a blank thing waiting to be told what to do. It carries the soul of its makers. If it is built by greed, it will serve greed. If it is built by men who have forgotten God, it will help the world forget him faster. There is no such thing as a tool without a master, and the master always leaves his fingerprints. And he warned where this leads. He wrote that in the era of these new machines, human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, and that ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human. New forms of dehumanization. He chose those words. He was not afraid of the machine itself. He was afraid of what the machine would let men do to one another while looking away. He was afraid of a world where decisions that used to require a human conscience are quietly handed to something that has none. Then he said something that has never appeared in a papal encyclical before, and this is where the warning sharpens into something almost frightening. He turned to war. For nearly 2,000 years, the Church has taught that under strict conditions, a war could be just. Leo XIV wrote that this teaching, which has so often been twisted to justify any war men wish to fight, is now outdated. He said humanity already possesses far better tools for resolving its conflicts, dialogue, diplomacy, and forgiveness, and that it is time we use them. He warned of weapons that can now choose and kill without a human hand on them. And he became the first pope ever to write into an encyclical a plea to ban such weapons outright. He wrote that any technology which lets a man attack without seeing the face of another human being lowers the moral threshold of conflict, without seeing the face. He understood that the great temptation of the coming years would be the temptation to do evil at a distance, cleanly, with no face to remember and no conscience to wake in the night. And he did something else, something that broke the silence of centuries. He looked back at the sins of the Church herself. He acknowledged that in ages past the Holy See had at times intervened to regulate and even to legitimize the enslavement of human beings, and he called it a wound in Christian memory, one we cannot pretend is not ours. And then, in the name of the whole Church, he asked for pardon. Sit with how rare that is. A pope in his very first encyclical, kneeling in the open and asking the world to forgive the Church for a sin centuries old. He did not do it to wound the Church. He did it to teach a lesson about the present. He connected the old slavery of bodies to a new slavery he saw rising in our own time. The hidden suffering behind the new machines, The men who dig the rare minerals out of the earth in conditions no one is meant to see, and a new kind of colonialism that no longer conquers land but harvests the data of human lives, our health, our movements, the very maps of our blood and our families. He called it a new face on an ancient evil. The old empires took your country. The new one takes your soul's record and sells it. Now you understand why the faithful felt something cold pass through them as they read. This is not a man worried about a clever toy. This is a shepherd standing on a hill, looking at the road ahead and naming the things he sees coming. Concentrated power answering to no one. War without a human face. Human beings turned into raw material. The same sicknesses Leo XIII named in 1878 returned in a new and more total form. One pope warned that man was forgetting God. The other warns that man is now building machines that will help him forget faster and call it progress. So where is the warning about the final years? It is not a date. He sets no date, and we should be grateful for that, because every man who has set a date has been made a liar by the sunrise. The warning is in the structure of the whole letter. It is in the two cities. The church has always taught that history is not a circle that spins forever. It moves, it has a direction and an end. And the saints and the mystics have always said the same thing about the last age, that it would be marked by a great gathering of human power that forgets God, a tower of pride followed by a moment of choosing. Leo XIV did not say we have arrived at the end. He is too careful, too holy to claim what only God knows. But he placed our moment squarely on that map. He took the imagery the church reserves for the last things, Babel, the New Jerusalem, the choice between the city of man and the city of God, and he laid it over the year 2026. That is the warning. He is telling the faithful that the choices being made right now in our lifetime are not ordinary choices. They are the kind that decide which city we are building. And he is telling us that we are building one of them, whether we admit it or not. There is no neutral ground. There never was. There is a phrase he uses near the heart of the letter that has stayed with those who read it. He writes that we must remain profoundly human in an age that no longer remembers how. Read it again and feel its weight. He's not asking us to fight the machines with machines. He's asking us to do the harder thing, to keep a human heart in a world that is learning every day to live without one, to still weep, to still pray, to still look another person in the face and see a soul and not a set of numbers. That, he says, is the resistance. That is how the few hold the line while the many drift. And here is the part that should bring you not fear, but a strange, steadying peace, because Leo XIV did not write to frighten his children. He wrote to prepare them. After all the warnings, he turns near the end and he speaks of hope. He writes that in Jesus Christ, this humanity in its grandeur becomes the way, the truth, and the life, opening a path for each of us to grow toward fullness. He writes that strengthened by the gift of God, we can move forward with confidence to face the demanding challenges that lie ahead. He writes that true progress always stems from a heart open to others, an intelligence willing to listen, and a will that seeks what unites rather than what divides. And in the final lines, with the heart of a shepherd and a father, he asks everyone, to abandon the building of yet another Tower of Babel and to join in building the common good, so that humanity will never lose its beauty and the world will once again recognize the human heart as the place where God desires to dwell. The place where God desires to dwell. That is how he ends it. not with a machine, not with a war, with the human heart and God making his home inside it. After 80 pages of warning, the last word is a door left open. So what does this mean for you, tonight, alone with your phone in the dark? It means that the old instinct in your chest, the one that told you the world was rushing towards something it did not understand, was not foolishness. A pope has now written it into the permanent teaching of the Church. It means the warning Leo XIII gave at the death of one age has been sounded again at the dawn of another, by a man who deliberately took his name. And it means the choice he describes is not made in Rome or in the great towers of the world. It is made in you, in whether you keep your heart human while everything around you grows colder, in whether you guard your family, your prayers, your small daily mercies, while the world tells you they no longer matter, in whether you remain, as he asked, profoundly human in an age that would rather you forget how. The cardinals who first read Magnifica Humanitas understood what the newspapers did not. This was not a pope describing a problem. This was a pope describing the road, all of you, from Babel to the holy city, and telling his flock which way to walk. The final years he points to may be near, or they may be far. That belongs to God alone, and any man who tells you otherwise is selling something. But the warning he hid inside the most modern words the Church has ever spoken is as old as Scripture itself. 2 cities, 2 builders, 1 choice. And he has placed it, signed and sealed and dated on the anniversary of the last great warning, into your hands. Read it slowly. Pray with it. Light a candle if you have one. And remember tonight that of all the millions who saw the headline and scrolled on past, you are among the few who stopped and listened and heard what he was really saying.